lot of talk these days about epigenetics, and the environmental and the intergenerational impacts that can be carried by individuals and communities. What are your thoughts about how to approach these issues?
Well, um, epigenetics is saying is the heritage, more of our heritage is passed through the genetics than just the DNA or just the um, biologicals. I've said this all along, which from a traditional Native American point of view, if we're influenced by the 7 generations behind us, somehow or another, we didn't know most of them, then the theory of epigenetics has been around for a long time. And it's passed down for 7 generations and extended to the next 7 generations. I've said all along for myself is my heritage was always more than the biology, even this cultural. It's energetic. So if I have an energetic heritage of certain things that uh, flow well and we're very good at, and certain things that don't flow well we're afraid to look at, I think that gets passed forward. So the idea of Native Americans is there are certain behaviors that are passed on and nobody knows why until somebody asks the question and changes it. And I'll give you a very colorful, off-color but colorful example. I had the pleasure of sitting with my uncles, nephews, and we had 4 generations of just men, my dad's side. Just a fluke. I mean, nobody planned it, we just did it. And one of the things that I pointed out is I asked the question is what the hell is this crazy stuff that you guys all do, which is either to get the kids to pee on, the boys to pee on an electric fence, or walk by when you're working on the motor, they'll grab a spark plug and grab a hold of you and shock you. What's that about? Because you all do it. And they all started laughing because it's the funniest thing. And I said, well, when you're a little kid, it ain't the funniest thing in the world. So I'm just asking, where did this crazy stuff come from? And my uncle, he was the oldest. When he was 7 years old, his dad, my grandfather, he had a brother, and I don't know what his name was, but I was named after my grandfather. And his brother's named Tinker. So we came from a lower income rural area, so Tinker would be an inventor. And he actually was good enough, he made a living off of it. So he'd invent these things, and he figured all this stuff out, and he'd sell it, and he was happy, and he bought a car. And this is in the days when nobody or very few had cars, at least in that area. And so in those days they had a magneto, and a lot of people don't know what a magneto was, but it's a little powerful power plant, and cars don't need them anymore. But at the time with the magneto, it shot up very powerful electrical into the motor through the spark plugs to create the fire to keep the engine running. And later they modified that drastically. But Tinker understood all this stuff and electrical, and my grandfather did. My grandfather was a master carpenter. So, and he literally was a master carpenter. It was unbelievable what he built. And so Tinker bet my grandfather $5, which back then was a lot of money, in the early 1900s, that he couldn't pee on top of the motor of this machine. And a lot of the men in the old days, if you dare them or bet them, they were stupid and they would do something they shouldn't do. So he pees on the motor, hit the magneto, threw him on the ground, and when it got up, and it took him a while, he figured out what happened. He was pissed. So my uncle said the only thing he saw was his Tinker had a 1-block lead running down the street as fast as he could, laughing as hard as he was, and my grandfather saying, I'm going to kill you. But that got passed down from my grandfather to each one of the boys. He had played this trick on each of them of shocking them, and nobody had ever questioned it. It's just something they did, and it was a joke. Now on one side you could say that's a rite of passage or initiation of all in the men. It's a shared common experience. But on the other side of it, it was something that was passed down 4 generations. And I asked the question, Don't you think we're past that? Do we really need to do that to all the grandkids to teach them about electricity? And because I said, if you really think about it, did anybody thought it felt good when you first did it? And everybody stopped. And I didn't shame anybody. I was just asking a question. So that was something past 4 straight generations without anybody ever questioning, and only one, my grandfather and my one uncle, only 2 who actually knew where it came from. So that's how we have what I call a heritage that's passed down beyond what we know. A lot of healing practices in the past were that way. They didn't understand where it came from. My grandmother had a 7th generation healing herbal garden, but none of her kids were interested in it. So when she got sick, nobody tended to it, and they all died. And it's amazing to me how some of those things die away that because we didn't take the time to really explain why this is important. So when we talk about epigenetics, there's a whole lot more about the scientific side of it, but they're basically saying is you inherit more genetically than just your biology. And spirituals would say is that's because you chose to come into that lifetime where this was all preset so you could have specific types of experiences so that your soul could learn. I mean, it's interesting to me is we have all this knowledge and information that's been around thousands of years, and the ones that don't want to believe it says it's hearsay. But others are continuing to look at it and saying, well, wait a minute, this explains life a whole lot more to me, and now science is catching up. Science is actually proving what's been said and taught for years, for generations, is actually true.